Homicide detectives will today be handed a brief of evidence which could see criminal charges laid over the Ruby Princess debacle. The cruise ship continues to languish off the New South Wales coast, with dozens of crew suspected to be infected with coronavirus. 11 passengers from the Ruby Princess have already died from COVID-19, with hundreds contracting the virus since the ship docked in Sydney last month.
The homicide investigation comes as the federal government makes last-minute changes to its $130 billion JobKeeper program to widen the net of those who qualify for the scheme. We'll get more from our reporters shortly, but in the last hour, the Queen has made a rare address to the Commonwealth about the coronavirus pandemic. Here's some of what she had to say.
While we have faced challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavour, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Our Europe correspondent Linton Besser joins us now from London. Good morning, Linton. We hear from the Queen at Christmas time, but it's pretty rare to see a message like this.
This is pretty unprecedented. The first time in her 70-year reign, Lisa, that she's actually had to address the nation as monarch in a moment of national crisis. And that clip that you played there, that phrase, "we will meet again," harks back to 1940, to the Blitz, when in fact it was the last time she made an address to the nation during World War II as a 14-year-old princess. She addressed the nation, but particularly the children who had to be evacuated, particularly from London during the Blitz. And it was that kind of wartime spirit that really resonated throughout her speech. She urged Britons to rely on their sense of self-discipline and good humour and fellow feeling, was how she put it, Lisa, to get through this difficult time. She acknowledged, of course, many families are mourning their loved ones. Many are in financial difficulties, and she paid special tribute to the frontline health workers and emergency services workers who are out there every day trying to help stem the tide of this thing, all the while potentially putting themselves at risk.
And Linton, it's been another very difficult weekend for the UK.
It has. 621 people died from COVID-19 or with COVID-19 symptoms in hospitals around the country in the past 24 hours. That takes the death toll to almost 5,000. And look, it's awful talking about these kinds of numbers. They kind of lose their meaning, but there are currently 50,000 cases. And what stood out for me, Lisa, in that is that that's a tenfold increase in just 15 days. So it has really taken off. And that is what everyone is worried about, that we're on the same kind of track as Italy and Spain, which have just been complete horror shows. In Spain, almost 700 dead in the past day. In Italy, more than 500. Those numbers are actually low. They're actually lower numbers than we have seen on the continent, and that's some kind of sign of hope. But in Britain, they really want to stop people going outside because springtime is here, the weather is warming up, and Matt Hancock, the health minister, even flagged banning any kind of outdoor exercise, whatever, if people, refuse to abide by the regulations.
Yes, we could see it from the pictures over the weekend. Very difficult to tell the Brits not to head out into the sunshine. Linton, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Americans have been told to brace for the hardest and saddest week of their lives as the death toll rises across the country. The Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, says the US state has had more than 8,000 new confirmed coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. It brings the total number of cases in the state to more than 122,000. Mr. Cuomo says more than 4,159 New Yorkers have died.
While the death toll in Italy has risen to more than 15,000, the number of patients in intensive care has fallen for the first time. The number of daily deaths in the country has been falling gradually over the past 8 days. In Germany, the rate of new infections has slowed for the third straight day, while there were 184 deaths. And there's some good news in Spain as the virus death rate continues to slow. The country's Prime Minister says the peak of infections may have passed.
Singapore has reported its biggest daily jump in coronavirus cases, with 120 reported in 24 hours. The country was one of the first outside of China to report cases in February and has received international plaudits for quickly limiting the outbreak through a strict regime of testing and tracing. But the World Health Organization has warned that a second wave of cases could hit Asia, partly fuelled by infected travellers returning home. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has encouraged the nation to join him in a candlelight vigil to mark the fight against coronavirus.
Charities have been granted a series of concessions to allow more people in the sector to access their JobKeeper wage subsidy. When the government first announced the $130 billion program, charities and not-for-profits had to prove they'd lost up to 50% of their income to be eligible. But Treasurer Josh Frydenberg says charities will now be eligible for the subsidy if they lose 15% of their turnover.
Police in the Solomon Islands have recovered 5 bodies in their search for 27 people who were swept off a ferry during Tropical Cyclone Harold. The Category 5 system is now threatening Vanuatu, where authorities have relaxed rules about physical distancing during the coronavirus outbreak to encourage more people to take shelter.
The Pope has celebrated the traditional Palm Sunday Mass without a congregation because of the coronavirus pandemic. Normally, he would have said Mass in the open in St Peter's Square with tens of thousands of the faithful attending, clutching olive tree branches or palm fronds. But this year it was held inside St Peter's Basilica, which was empty except for a handful of worshippers who sat well apart from each other.
The National Museum of Australia is crowdsourcing content to build a COVID-19 collection. It'll help tell the story of the economic and social fallout of the virus for future generations. The Bridging the Distance project asks Australians to share their stories about life in the time of coronavirus and can be found through the museum's social media pages. Jessie Dorset joins us now from Sydney. Nicole Asher is reporting from Melbourne and Noor Haider is in Canberra. Jessie, I want to start with you. Where is the ship now?
It's just south of Sydney, Lisa. It's been travelling up and down the New South Wales coast all night very slowly. This morning, it's again heading south, and I can tell you that we're expecting it to dock at Port Kembla, which is near Wollongong, about an hour and a half south of Sydney. That's where authorities will meet the ship, and when it's in port, it will be a lot easier for health authorities to access the ship and attend to any sick crew members. We know that there are about 200 crew members on board that are showing signs of COVID-19. All of them are self-isolating on the ship.
And Jessie, we're hearing more stories from passengers who were actually on board.
Yeah, as well as the Ruby Princess being a hospital ship, it's potentially a floating crime scene, Lisa. The New South Wales Police Commissioner has confirmed that a criminal investigation is underway into the debacle that saw 2,700 people disembark the Ruby Princess in Sydney last month. Some flew across the country, others internationally, and hundreds have since tested positive to coronavirus, and 11 people who were on board the ship have since died. The New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller has said that the homicide squad will handle the investigation. He'll today hand over any evidence that he's already collected to that squad. And some passengers have been telling Channel 7 that they're very frustrated about the way the situation was handled.
As sensible humans, we don't want to infect people. We don't want to cause harm or hurt other people. Being told that we could travel meant, OK, we can travel. The government says we can travel. It's safe to travel. But it obviously wasn't. And then come Saturday morning, it was just like, yeah, this isn't right. Something's... I've got it.
Carnival Australia, which owns the Ruby Princess, has released a statement. It says that it will willingly cooperate with the investigation and vigorously respond to any allegations. Lisa?
Thanks, Jesse. Nicole, there was a bit of optimism yesterday about the numbers of cases in Australia. How's it looking this morning?
That's right. The Chief Medical Officer has said that we're in a relatively good place when it comes to the infection rate. So now across Australia, we're up to 5,693 cases. That's up 6 from yesterday morning. We've also had one more death in Australia, taking the death toll up to 35, and that was one of those passengers from the Ruby Princess. They died in a hospital in Queensland. In better news, though, there have been more than 2,000 people who've recovered from coronavirus across the country. Now, Brendan Murphy, the Chief Medical Officer, yesterday said that yesterday's rise was about the lowest they'd seen in days, so was continuing that trend of the curve flattening. They're saying that what we're doing is working, so the message is to continue staying home and only going out if it's essential and washing your hands.
And Nor, it's going to be a big week in Canberra, but restricted like almost everything in our lives at the moment.
Well, that's right, Lisa. Some MPs will be flown to Canberra on special RAAF aircrafts ahead of Parliament sitting on Wednesday. It will be a reduced Parliament. There will be 30 government MPs and 21 opposition MPs along with the crossbench. Now, of course, Parliament is returning to deal with the government's $130 billion wage subsidy scheme. That will see some 6 million workers paid $1,500 a fortnight. Workers affected by the coronavirus will get that money, but for that money to be handed out, legislation will have to go through the Parliament. The government is adamant it wants it debated and passed on Wednesday. Now, Labor says it will not be blocking the passage of this legislation, but does want to see changes made to the criteria for casual workers. At the moment, only casuals that have been within the same job for more than 12 months are eligible. Unions and Labor want that change. Last night, the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg also confirmed that there would be changes to the criteria for charities. Charities and not-for-profits will now have to show that their revenue has declined by 15%, not 30% like other businesses, Lisa.
To the three of you, thank you very much for bringing us up to date this morning. Well, top US officials are issuing increasingly stark warnings about the coronavirus pandemic as the death toll soars past 9,000.
Some are comparing the likely carnage of the coming week to the attacks on Pearl Harbor and September 11. For more, our North America correspondent James Glenday joins us now. James, good morning to you. Is New York still the main problem for America?
Well, it certainly is the biggest problem, but authorities are also increasingly concerned about what's happening in New Orleans, in New Jersey, in Massachusetts, in Illinois, and also in Florida. All those places have more than 10,000 cases. The only two parts of the country that seem to be doing a little bit better are California and Washington State. They also have more than 10,000 cases, but their curve is beginning to flatten. But the big one is New York. Another 594 deaths have been recorded in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, there were more than 600 deaths, and officials in that state and also here in Washington are really trying to brace Americans for the next week or two ahead, warning that they could be some of the most traumatic in America's history. This morning, the US Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, made a number of comparisons to historical events and really said that he wanted everyone in the country to be taking this as seriously as possible. Here's some of what he had to say.
This is going to be the hardest and the saddest week of most Americans' lives, quite frankly. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country, and I want America to understand that.
Jerome Adams really on the front foot there. James, we've seen the Democrats in the last 24 hours starting to amp up their attacks on Donald Trump for his response so far.
Yeah, there's a couple of Democratic governors who are particularly angry with the way the White House has handled this. A lot of them right now have their hands out for more protective equipment for doctors and nurses, for more ventilators. Most states say they don't have enough for the coming surge. And we even heard from the former Vice President Joe Biden, who is likely to be Donald Trump's opponent at November's presidential election, come out today and fiercely criticised the White House for not acting swiftly enough and effectively saying that a huge number of Americans were going to die as a result of that inaction. We also heard the former Vice President really criticise Mr. Trump for refusing to wear a face mask, even though we heard just a couple of days ago that that is now the official recommendation from health officials here for anyone who leaves the house to get groceries or medicine to cover up. And Mr. Biden had some very, very harsh words about Mr. Trump's inaction on that.
James, we were hearing from Linton Besser in London just a couple of moments ago talking about how it's starting to get sunny in London, how it's getting harder to resist going out into the park there. In America there, where things are still looking so dire, what's life like for you on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And we've seen some local officials here really try to warn people not to go to parks because spring has sprung in Washington. It is beautiful most mornings outside. It's warm. There are flowers, there are bees, there are birds, the trees are blooming. But because of that, some local officials are quite worried that too many people are going to parks and getting too close to one another and therefore not properly socially distancing. So we've actually seen some more police in recent days starting to enforce that in parks, at big tourist attractions and things like that. But it is interesting, just since Friday when that official announcement was made that people should be wearing masks, there has been a noticeable increase in the number of people wearing face coverings, particularly around downtown Washington, DC.